15 tips in 15 minutes or so. Throw the or so on there because we will try to get through these as best as we can. But let's just walk through a few of these as we go. So leave that in the slide. So navigation lists. If you haven't ever used navigation lists in the system, highly recommend using these. Main purpose is they give a great way of adding functionality and such to your daily routine. These have been improved in the latest versions. So let's just take a look at these, and I'll leave these slides so that you have them as a reference point. But let's just take a look at how these function these days and recommendations on how they work. So we're going to try to get through these as quickly as we can. So navigation lists are the little lists that show up on the left-hand side here of any of the modules that you're in. And usually they start underneath the very first listing up there, and they kind of work their way down. So for example, if we were to take a look at receivables transactions, navigation lists give kind of a look and feel of what smart lists gives you, but it adds additional functionality to that process that really promotes at least taking a look at these. We've got quite a few customers that have some really good workflow things set up by their employees. I will tell you, the first time getting into the navigation list can be a little painful, as we're seeing right now in this demonstration. I would like to use this one just as kind of that opening bit here for it can take a second to run. And the reason for that is that the navigation lists by default are all turned on with what's called the business analyzer. And that's those little KPI reports that show up from your reporting server. And if those aren't set up, or they are set up and there's a lot of data that it's got to dig through, whatever it may be, or even if it's just the first time that the report server has been accessed for the day, that first run can be a little painful to get into. So my recommendation is once this fires up, there's a place where we'll turn that off so that the next time around it goes a lot better than what we see is happening now. So it'll hang up for a moment, it'll run, and then the navigation list gives us that ability to again look at different documents. It'll give us the ability to select different documents as we move through those. It also adds functionality for being able to select and print an email from a list of specific information. So, and normally it goes a little bit quicker than this, so that's why I threw the or so on my 15 tips. There we go. So this little area over here was the main culprit and why that was taking a long time to run. Again, depending on the amount of data and such, it can take a moment for that to gear up. My suggestion, first thing you do when you get into these is just go ahead and either hit Control F2 or just turn off that business analyzer. And that'll just make life quicker the next time around when you get in. So a navigation list, just a real high level and from a functionality standpoint, I have the ability to, of course, double click on any of these and look at these, but as I check these boxes in here, I gain a little bit of additional functionality here where I can manage these with, in this instance, with an NSF. If they were postable documents, I could post those all in one fell swoop. I could delete those if I really wanted to. And then I can, of course, review and look at additional pieces of information here. I can add a lot of filters to this, essentially as many as I want to based off of the number of columns that are available. And then I can also create my own favorites off of this too. So if you had some specific one where, hey, I want to see where the date is, let's say, equal to yesterday. I'm looking at yesterday's receivables, and I fire that off, and I look at this report, and I want this to be a saved copy of a document to look at. All I have to do is up here at the top, do a save as, and then give it a name. And then I don't have to ever do that again to be able to add that filter in. So let's just call this yesterday's receivables transactions. And now that I've created that version of it, and you can see here, life should go a little bit quicker now that we've got that business analyzer turned off and system tuned up a little bit for this one. But now I've got a quick way to be able to view that data. And again, I can double click on those and get into them. I can add additional filters as I need to. And then there's some additional customization functions that are underneath this where I can add to my homepage, or I can customize this and rearrange and knock things off as they need to for that specific for this specific navigation list. So I can add in additional columns if something wasn't on there. So the customer's purchase order number, ship to address, columns are a little limited in this view. I can modify my action pane, which is these guys up here at the top. If there was something that I didn't want up there, I can take that off for the group of users, or I could add actions to it. A lot of different actions can be added to this. So a lot of things to definitely look at in this. Sharing for everyone, or add specific users so that when they get in, they can gain access to this immediately. So I can create it for myself, get it nice and tuned up, and then I can deploy it out for other people or for everyone in one easy step. And then the report settings and such. What reports do I want to show up if I want to use that business analyzer section? Again, that does tend to slow down the experience a little bit just for whenever it's working through those, but it is a nice feature because as I start to select records on there, those KPIs actually reflect those records that I select. So at first it's a global view, but as I select individual records, those KPIs will actually tune based off of the record that I've selected. So there's some cool features within that that are definitely something to look at. So next one on my list is using shortcuts. And this is something that I usually cover in our, in an initial training with a customer. And if you're not using it today, it's definitely an area to take a look at just to speed up your experience. And the reason that I say that is the whole idea of the GP homepage, as you know, is meant to be my one-stop shop for everything that I need to do in GP. If I do this right, if I tune my homepage right, I don't have to necessarily navigate to any of the other buttons up here at the top or go into the modules on the left-hand side and everything. What I do on a daily basis is all right here. So I like to stress the idea of using the shortcuts over on the left-hand side. When I right-click over here, this is where I can add in and add a window, a smart list, a macro, a web page, or an external shortcut, or even group those things into folders. So as I add this over here, now I can add any window from any one of the modules that's registered with GP that I use. There was a specific one that I wanted to add over there, let's say customer cash receipts, and then I can bolt that on there. Now tip number 3 to this is not only can I do that, but I can also add these in and I can add a keyboard shortcut to it. So if I want to add a hotkey to one of these so that it makes my life easier when I get into the system, I know if I push this specific key combination, then it hops me right into applying my cash documents or getting into the receivables transaction entry. Let's say that one. So now my receivables transaction entry, and I'll add this over there. But before I do that, underneath this drop down here, whole lot of hotkeys that you could plug for it. I wouldn't go crazy. And the only reason I say that is because there's a lot of buttons out here, so you're going to start to lose track of these really quick. So find something that's memorable for yourself, find a key that you're not accidentally hitting all the time, things along those lines. But find something out there that makes it relevant for what you're looking for. So I'm going to say F8 is my receivables transaction entry button, and I'm going to add that over there. So that's a nice function for these shortcuts. So not only being able to add those and group those in there, but also doing those. The last one for the section over here to look at is the startup section. So if I was to take and say, okay, my daily routine, as soon as I get into the system here, the first thing I do is I pull up this smart list, or I look at this information, or whatever it may be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a smart list. And let's say on any given moment that I get in, and when I get into the system, I'm going to go in and I'm a collection person. So I'm going to go look at my past due customers in the system. So I'm going to stroll down here, I'm going to look, and I'm going to find, let's say, past due customers. So here's my smart list in the system for past due customers. Not going to throw a keyboard shortcut on it this time, but I'm just going to add this over here. And then if I want to, I can take that and drop it into this folder here for startup. And to do that, it doesn't always work nicely because I can't necessarily just drag and drop it. But if I right click on this and do a cut, and then I do a right click on startup and I do a paste, the next time that I log into GP, whatever I have underneath this startup here is all going to pop up for me automatically. And as we get to the end of this presentation, I'll go ahead and I'll shut down GP and I'll throw that back up just so we can see that one run. But that's the idea. There's something that every time I get into GP, it's the same process that I start out with where, all right, here I am. and now I go here and I do this and I get to this window. I could load any one of these shortcuts. It could be a macro, it could be to a web page, an external shortcut, whatever it needs to be underneath that startup window. So I don't have to push another button. GP pulls open and I'm on my way for what I need. Next one that I always like to stress, and I try to bring this up to any customers that I'm working with, especially when I see them and they're searching for documents through just the normal lookups in GP and such. So, okay, now I go to sales transaction entry and now I look for the sales order and I'm weeding through all of the documents that show up in sales transaction entry. So navigate here, go to sales transaction entry, and then I'm looking underneath the drop down here for this document in the system. And I want to find a specific one, and I'm in here looking. Well, the thing to remember, this list of information that you're looking at is based off of the same architecture of SmartList in the first place. So when you go in and you're searching for a document, when you click on that little binocular button on the right-hand side, same exact window that you have in the SmartList within GP. So I always like to promote, instead of weeding through this window every time, because it's a little bit slower, it's a little bit harder to get to everything, there aren't just immediate things for contained statements and all of that, I like to tailor a set of smart lists to help me facilitate my searches. And the way to do this is if we go up and underneath a smart list, and again, you can have a limited smart list, so when you run out of search criteria, it's no harm or difficulty in adding a new one at that point. But what we can do is in our smart list, once we get this going and we find the one that we want to work with. So in this case, we're in sales transactions, and I want to create one of these for doing a document lookup. To utilize this for a document lookup, and I've got a few of them out there already from other things. Let's go ahead and pull up one of those from previous times. So the trick here is to create your search criteria and leave it as the field contains blank, and do that for each one of the things that you want to search by. And you can see here that I've got 3 different ones that I actually work by within here that I've used in previous demonstrations and examples for other individuals. And this makes a great way to be able to come in and search for something. So now I utilize SmartList for finding my document, and I come in and I say, hey, you know what, I'm looking for, I'm trying to find Bob. Hey, where is Bob out here in my documents? And if there's any Bobs that exist in the system, then it would give that. Or if there's any Seans that exist out here. I don't know if I've ordered anything for myself. Let's find out. So there's a couple from me. So now I've quickly found Sean in this case, but I could have searched by any one of those. Not only does the customer name contain Sean, but I could have also talked to this specific contact person, or maybe the customer knew 3 digits of their document number, but not all of them, whatever it may be. So it's a huge benefit and a huge speed boost to be able to use that, because then you can kind of get a view of not only that specific document, but maybe some other things that exist out there. So then I can double click and get into that document, and I can start working with it at that point instead of having started at the other part, because SmartList, of course, drills into that document. So I love using SmartList, and I love promoting SmartList as a way for doing your document lookup or customer lookup or vendor lookup, or any of the lookups that are in the system. So if you find it taking too long just with the magnifying glass next to a field, this is definitely a viable option to be able to work with. Next one to bring up, and this is probably known to some, but it isn't known to all. I'm always surprised at the individuals who just didn't ever catch that this was a thing, or they just didn't realize that it was a thing. When you're in and you're entering in any of the documents within GP, doesn't matter what window you're in, if you're in a date field and you type in a character, if I type in the number 7, it's going to immediately assume that I want the 7th day of the system date that I have down here in the bottom left of GP. So if I'm in the system and I'm future dating things and I want those to be in the future, right now I realize I'm in April 12th, 2027. The future's great, apparently. But in here, we're going to take this and we're going to say, okay, I'm going to enter in a document for the 19th. So if I type in the 19 into that field and tab off of it, it immediately assumes and defaults to the 19th of that month. The other part for shorthand, I can do an 0312, and that'll do the other. I didn't have to put in the entire year for it. So just a quick tip there for you. From a date entry standpoint, it just makes life a little bit easier as you're going through and you're keying those in, if you just know that you can just put in the day number versus having to do that. Back to navigation. If you haven't done this before, I definitely suggest it from a certain standpoint. My toolbar has kind of gone haywire at this point because I've added in so many things for examples on this and previous things. But if you haven't used it before, the toolbar is a fantastic place to customize and add in navigational elements for you as you travel throughout GP. So as I said, the home page is, the premise there, and our idea is that the home page will be the end all for all navigation in the system. But if I do find myself navigating, or maybe I'm just somebody who's comfortable going from module to module in the system, the thing about the toolbar is it never leaves me alone. So it's always there, it's always available. So the toolbar has the ability, if I right click in this little band above the white space and below the gray space, it gives me this pop-up here where I can add in predefined navigation to specific modules. So for instance, if I just come in and let's go ahead and let's just wipe these all out. And let's just focus on, so my main one is, what you saw out there. It's the bit up here with transactions, inquiry, reports, cards, the fly out navigation for GP. Right click again, my standard. If you've never added this in, highly suggest and always suggest that standard be probably the primary one that you at least throw on there other than main. And that gives us quick access to our smart lists, task lists, our reminders, and then my reports section as well. Above and beyond that, I can add in other modules. If I add in my sales, now I've got access to sales transaction entry, receivables transaction entry, and others. If I didn't want all of those buttons, I myself as a user can get in and customize this toolbar. So go underneath here, customize, find the toolbar that I want to customize. So in this case, sales. And you know what? I don't need receivables batches. So I'm going to modify the selection. And you know what? I'm just going to take that. And I'm going to delete that. And then I'm going to find the next one. And you know what? I'm not going to edit serial numbers. And I'm not going to change serial numbers. And I'm not responsible for posting. And you know what? I don't do cash receipts. And I don't do transaction entry. So I just want sales transaction entry up there. And I want sales transaction entry to be pretty. So I'm going to select that and then go underneath here and do image and text and say, OK. So now my selection just is really narrowed down. And I have one big button for sales transaction entry that never leaves me no matter where I go in the system. So same concept for all the other things that are out there. If I needed to add something to that toolbar, it's real easy to do that as well. So definitely a place to look at and to explore if you need a place to add in some additional functionality, navigational elements. To add in a new window onto this for navigation is relatively simple. Once you come in, choose the module. Hey, you know what? I get in and I do a lot of order fulfillment as well, or printing sales documents. I'm going to go ahead and select that, add that into my list, modify that selection, image and text. I'm going to move that down below the sales transaction, say OK. Looks great. I'm going to unlock my toolbar. I'm going to grab that section. So if you can see it right there next to each one of what would be considered those groupings, there's a little control there, and then I can drag these things around. I can then scoot them over. Once I'm done doing that, relock my taskbar and everything's rearranged and looks nicer. So can look cluttered pretty quickly. You can, do quite a bit with the way that this actually is laid out. If I unlock that toolbar and I move these things down, it can be structured. It can be larger than just the little sliver that you see. I do suggest if you move things around, go ahead and make sure you lock that toolbar again, because these have a notorious nature of actually moving themselves around without being locked in place. So excellent feature there to use, tip to use if you don't use it in the first place. Again, hopefully speeding your life up, your experiences up as you move through GP. Next spot to cover is the My Reports section. And this is a nice thing that is added on your home page, and it's also up in the toolbar up here at the top if you add your standard section. And this has a nice benefit to it of being able to quickly add reports that you use throughout GP. Those can be smart lists, those can be Excel reports, those can be GP reports. They can be any of the reports that essentially run in the system. Few tricks to getting those added, depending on where you're at in the system. So if I want to add my purchase order status report, the way that this functions to add any report usually is just as quick as any of your reporting options. So if I'm in purchasing and I'm in reports, and then I'm under, let's say, analysis. When I'm in my options for that report, and I have all of my options lined up the way that I want to, all my selection criteria, whatever it needs to be, all I have to do to get that to show up under my reports is find the My Reports button up at the top. I click on that, pops up, it says, add that to my reports, you give it a name, and then you save it out there. And then that ends up being on your homepage and underneath your drop down up here to be able to gain access to. Other reports, the Excel reports, the SQL reports, smart lists and things like that, those can all be added to the My Reports section as well. But the way to do that is to go through the navigation lists over on the left-hand side, depending on the module that you want to work with. So same functionality, same process for each one of these. I'm going to hit Excel reports at this point. And fingers crossed that this runs relatively quick here for us. And what I'm going to do is once this pulls up, just as we did in the navigation list example at the beginning of this, we're going to check the box on the left-hand side, and then we're going to look for the My Reports section at the top. And what that will do is take my Excel report, my SQL report, or my Smart List report, or my Smart List favorite, and add it under the My Reports as well. So all of those options don't have just the native button on them like the GP one does, but this is a little trick that you can use to get those to populate in your My Reports section if you want to utilize that. Give that just a second here. There we go. So then to do this, all you would do is you would find the report that you want to use, check that box next to it, and then look for the My Reports section at the top and hit Add To. Same thing for any of the smart lists that you find under Smart List Favorites or Reporting Services reports as well. So pretty quick and easy to be able to run that and add those to it. Back to our navigation. Again, keeping that part flowing. I like to speed things up. I like to make things quick and easy as much as possible in the system here, so you aren't having to bounce around and do too many clicks. It's a common phrase that gets thrown around, too many clicks to do something. So the next one is utilizing reminders. And if we were all in a group together and visible, I'd ask right at this moment, who all uses reminders? So the reminders section, if you're not using this to date, reminders are based upon your smart lists in the system. And the way that that functions is think of any list that you create that is more of a dynamically growing and shrinking list. Today's customers past due. Okay, well, the idea that customer past due list is going to go up and it's going to go down as customers pay off and accumulate debt with you. So you'll see that that list grow and collapse. That is what a reminder would be, not something that is a list of every single document in the system back to the beginning of the time. You don't want to use that. If you use something that is every single record, all sales transactions, your homepage will continually get slower and slower and slower and slower. So I highly recommend, if anybody on this call has ever or has the current issue where you get into GP and your homepage takes an excruciatingly long amount to load up, and anytime you come back to it, the same behavior, double check your reminders and make sure that you don't have something that's too off the wall up here. Because the thing you have to figure when it's accumulating and doing and presenting all these numbers, it has to run that query behind the scenes and do a summation of that information. So it can take a bit. But in order to utilize and take advantage of any of these reminders out here, you want to condense the data down in your report. So again, past due customers is a good example that we used in one of our shortcuts a moment ago, but it's also a good example of what I would consider something that is, a growing and shrinking list dynamically on a day-to-day basis. As people do collections, that customer pays down his balance, and voila, they drop off of this list at some point. So past due customers becomes a great example and a great addition to our reminders. So to add a reminder, we would go in, do a new reminder. We have to remember what our smart list favorite is. So keep that window pulled up next to it if you need to, or just memorize it. In this case, it's pretty easy to find. We're going to go in, we're going to say do a new reminder. I'm going to go out and I'm going to find my smart list favorite. Should be relatively easy to find. In this case, I should just be able to type in past due and find any reference of a past due out there. So let's just hop up here to the top, do a past due. Search should come down, and there's my past due customer transactions and just past due customers. Just depends on what you're looking for. I'm going to go ahead and grab past due customers because I want a smaller list than all the past due transactions that are out there. I figure I can dig into it. Next thing for the reminder, to make this an effective reminder in the system, you want to make sure where you've got the number of records is greater than 0. If you're the first line of defense for this, and this is your responsibility to go in and be the first person who calls any past due customers that show up, then it's greater than 0. If you are the second line of defense, maybe you're whenever the records get a little bit further down the road. Let's say you're a supervisor and you're responsible for X amount of people going through and making collection calls. But you know what? If you get a list of 100 past due customers, something's going on. So you could put a number in there for greater than records, but in this case, I'm going to leave it as 0. And then I'm going to drop down. And this is just the little option there for whether or not you want it to show up as a stack of papers in that reminder window. And I don't think I've got any examples of that right at the moment, but let's go ahead and we'll turn it on for this. And then I'll say, okay. So again, selected my smart list favorite. Number of records is greater than 0. Display as Q, and I say okay. And then any records that when I go into that smart list and a record shows up, then it shows up under my reminders. If I go into that smart list and nothing shows up, then it does not show up as a reminder on my page. So let's go ahead and let's see if we can get that to pop up here now for us. Might need to whittle down that list. My home page is getting a little slow. But reminders are a great way to help notify you and let you know of things that you need to pay attention to and to get in and work with in the system. Yeah, definitely got to whittle down that list. I think my past due customer transactions is starting to accumulate. My customers never pay their bills in my demo. So now past due customer shows up. This icon that it's showing up now is that Q button that I selected in there. So this icon is kind of neat because, smaller amount of work, smaller stack of papers, larger number, bigger stack. So it just changes based off of the number of records that actually show up in there. The next section is using the quick links. And if you're not using this today, it's very similar to the shortcuts on the left-hand side and the toolbar at the top. It's just one more place that you can go in and set up. Step by step is kind of how I like to position these. Great example I have is a customer that I worked with. They wanted their users' environment set up to be, really nice and clean cut and to the point of, okay, here's where you go first, here's where you go second, here's where you go third, here's where you go fourth. So in their case, we set up their quick links and defined this by adding in all of the things that they would do on a daily basis. And as we added those in, we arranged them in exactly that order. Here's where you go first, here's where you go second, here's where you go third, here's where you go fourth, fifth, sixth, whatever. And we set that up so that they had a nice flow of the way that looked. So worked out real well for them because they had a single use function. But the other side of this is this not only is, being able to add links to GP windows and such, but it can also be to the GP navigation lists if you're going to start to leverage those. So you don't have to go down here to get to it or anything. You can just add them all underneath the list here. It can be to a web page or an external program or file. So it could call up an Excel report for you within that. So just another nice section to be able to define some quick navigation to as you work through your configuration of GP. Let's see. Other one that a lot of users don't realize is a thing in GP, and it's either something that got run over too quick in the beginning, or it's just one of those things that was never covered. But every single user has the ability to get to a user preferences window. And I know this is brought up, and I know it's mentioned, and if you've ever changed your password, this is where your password in GP gets changed. So just kind of keep in mind that this is all the functionality that you're kind of looking for there. But as we're working through here, and we want to make changes to the way that the system kind of functions here, we're able to come through and make changes to specific settings within this. So if you're using HR, you can have the system automatically pop up your to-do list, your personal to-do list, and so on. At that point, you can get into your reminders settings directly from here and configure the way that your reminders look on your homepage. You can change your display. So this user preferences gives you the ability to update and change your display. So if you needed your links and your your required fields and such to look differently than what they do, you can make changes to the colors out here for the way that those look and whether or not they're a little more obvious than what they were before. So now my required fields would be red and bold at this point. Change the font style of link fields and the color of link fields. I don't suggest using yellow and things along those lines. Gets a little hard on the eyes at that point, but it's nice to be able to change these things, especially from a new user standpoint. Changing those to bold and red is kind of a nice add because it makes their life a little bit easier to find those things. Bold isn't always as obvious as you would hope it was. It also gives you the ability to make changes to some of the other things. Okay, the default report destination, your entry key. I know it's out there as an option, and you can change it from tab to return. If you were a return person before, you're coming from an old character-based system or some of the older ERP platforms. Enter was the go-to for moving field to field, and then GP threw a wrench in the whole thing and changed it to tab. You can make a change to that here. Just be aware that not everything works beautifully with that. There's some windows in like manufacturing, there's some third-party software and things like that that may not function as good as you would expect them to once you make that change to using the enter key versus the tab key. The other option here is the window command display. If you are a manufacturing user to this day and you're still using the action pane up here at the top, you may have noticed that in your purchasing window and other places, when you right click to delete a row, you can't do it because there's native links in there for the right click of manufacturing functions and stuff. So if you are a manufacturing user and you want to gain access to being able to delete rows and things like the purchase orders and such, change it back to the menu bar. All that does is it gets rid of this new functionality up here that it did for the visual kind of office look to it. And it changes it back to the good old-fashioned, file, edit, and options, native-looking window type display. Sales document type for the default. This is nice because you can just, if it's a user that's in sales all the time, you can just say which one you want it to default to begin with. And then mapping buttons down here at the bottom. Do not display map point buttons or whatnot at that point, or map point on the web. All that means is, do you want it to have where the user can click on the little globe icon or the map button on an address to actually go out to Bing Maps to verify an address or whatever. So a few options within there. There's a piece in here for the workflow delegation. So if you didn't realize that your user preferences are hiding out here, that's where you can get to them and make some of those different system changes for your specific user. Another one is customizing your homepage. If you ever wanted to knock panes off, you've got into your homepage and now you're in there and you've always got that connect icon showing up, or business analyzer, or sections that you don't want. Customize this page in the upper right-hand corner gives you access to being able to change the layout, how you want those to look. I want them to be a 2-column, a 1-column setup. I don't want my quick links on the homepage. I don't want business analyzer, whatever it is, and say okay. Latest and greatest version of GP, it does get rid of the Dynamics 365 Business Central Insights. I'm not sure why that came in and why it's going out, but in the future, that's just not going to be part of the options anymore. So I can change the look and feel of the homepage to make my navigation a little bit easier. There's a few things that I can do on my homepage too once I do make changes to it. So now it's in the 2-column structure. If I need a section bigger, I can, of course, size that up and work with that. I can drag and drop and move things around. That same functionality exists on the other windows too. So I myself as a user, if I am not doing anything in the setup window and other areas, if I hit customize this page on the sales side, I can get rid of the things that are not important to me. Things I'll never use, things I'll never work with in the system. So from there, I can grab each one of those, I can knock those off. Those take them off the menu. If there was something underneath the scenes that I still needed to get to, I can still get to it through general navigation up here at the top. But it's no longer, just something showing up or taking up space on the window. So customize this page is also available on each one of the modules as you work through. And then the last one that I wanted to bring up for today's session is the hotkeys that are available throughout the system. If you're not using those to date, it just can help speed things up. So as we said, your tab key is your, what you use to move field to field. So as I'm moving field to field, I'm using the tab key to get from place to place. Add my customer, tabbing through as I get to a field and I tab in and I do this. If I want to move back, if you haven't ever done this before, your shift tab key. It's just the same as what you use in some of the computer programs and on the web, forms and things like that. Shift tab moves me backwards and then tab just moves me forward. So if you're really trying to stick to the keyboard, that's our quick way of being able to do so. So the other one is Control P. Control P is our print hotkey on any of the windows. So the majority of the windows, Control P will take us and allow us to do the print dialog that pops up for that window. In the sales side as well, Control S and other windows as well. Control S is our save hotkey. Other one is Control L is our lookup for any field that has a magnifying glass next to it. So Control L is our quick button to be able to get into the lookup. Control W, good and bad, but that'll close the window down. So again, if you're really trying to, you're trying to stay to that keyboard, that is one of the things that you can use to get out of that window and move on with your life. If you've got all your hotkeys set up with your control shifts and all of that, you can really get into opening up and closing down windows relatively quick with all the hotkeys that are available out there. From a sales standpoint, there's one other that's out here too. It's the quick print option. If you've never set up quick print under your sales, that's underneath the options drop down here, and you can set up the quick print. Control P runs the quick print, and what the quick print does is whatever options you have set in here, it would run for you. So I'm going to just turn all these on, and I'm going to say save. And then while I'm in this document, if you noticed in my options, let's just take one quick look at that before we run away. Keep current document displayed. From a sales standpoint, that's pretty cool because out of the box with GP, when you save a document or you print a document, it goes away. So the quick print is a nice function for that because it'll keep the document displayed at that point. So kind of like a macro, Control P. It's running through the quick print functionality right at that moment. Pulled open the window, ran all my buttons, printed my documents. So it is kind of like a macro that's saved in the system, but it's just a nice piece that they've added onto that window with a nice user interface to be able to set it up versus you having to record that exactly as it is each time around. And of course, my invoice is pulled back open. So you got a lot of users that do like hey, I want to look at this on the screen real quick to make sure that it looks nice before I email it to the customer. Quick Print's a nice piece for that to give you quick access. And of course, I got templates all set up and everything, so it's running those reports. But that's it for my for tips and tricks. As I said, we'll try to do this relatively quick here for the shutdown and restart, so you can see that startup window pop open if I can. Can't leave the document. Let's save. And as I'm doing that, just to display the startup shortcut, are there any questions on any of the topics we kind of blazed through in 15/20 minutes here? Again, we've got a slide with all these options. The one other thing that I wanted to mention is any of these windows that we've looked at today in the presentation, if you get into them and you just kind of need a pointer, never hesitate to hit the F1 key while you're in any of those windows. You know, for getting into your navigation list customizations, or you're working with your homepage customizations or anything. There's a lot of good help dialogue right out in GP for that. So let me close GP down. We'll try to get this to pull back up real quick so we can see that that startup window display for us relatively quick. But any other questions? I didn't see anything come across the chat dialogue, but